share the word of God. So please pray. Those listening online, for those who are part of RCF, it's great to be able to gather together. As we move back into lockdown, unfortunately, we don't have people in the room apart from the technical team. But please do continue to stay connected. Continue to stay connected with one another. WhatsApp, phone calls, waving at people. What about writing a letter or a postcard? Not that difficult, and it will arrive. It will get there. Our current season, we are looking at standing on. And last week we looked at standing on the promises. This week we're looking at making a stand for the kingdom. Now you can see that I'm standing right now. Some of you are probably sitting right now. Some of you may still be standing. It's good to get up out of chairs and keep the circulation going. God is a good God, and He has a kingdom, and He wants to get to know His kingdom. So let me start by just reading a simple verse from Matthew chapter 10, verse 6. It says this: "Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." God's kingdom coming here on earth. God's way, He's God's framework. What we do know about a kingdom is in a kingdom there is a king, and His rule, He sets the rules. The king or the queen sets the rules. That's the way things work. And we bring homage to the king. That's the way kingdoms work. And we're talking here about a kingdom that is above all kingdoms, the kingdom of God, which passes all understanding. And He sent His one and only Son to pay the price that we could know Him. And in His kingdom we find different concepts of work. Firstly, God is at work. God wants to be on the throne. There are 10 commandments in the Old Testament, in the Torah, that talk about, for example, that you should not murder. But when Jesus came to this earth, the Son of God, and was asked, which are the most important rules? What He said was, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and all your strength. And then love your neighbour as yourself. Now we could get into discussions about what that means this morning, but in the kingdom, love is the currency. Love is the key. And it's when we run out of love, and I'm sure at times over lockdown, as we're compressed into a space with our family and the people we live with, maybe we do lose our rack sometimes. But you know what? God is able to hear and to do. God is able to do immeasurably more than we ask or imagine. And so His kingdom come here on earth. We want His standards, His ways to come to us today, into our world, into our lives. Let me just check the sounds with you. It seems to be working, just wanted to double check. So His kingdom come, His will be done. And do you know what? I think it's interesting as we've journeyed into a second phase of lockdown here in the UK. People are talking about how they're not allowed to do this and not allowed to do that. Guys, I'd love to reframe your thinking today. I'd love to reframe your thinking. Rather than think about what you're not able to do, think about the possibilities of what you can do. Some of us have been furloughed, and that means we're getting our salary paid, but we don't have to go to work. In fact, we're not meant to work. So now we have a reliable income, some of us have business, and we have free time. What are you going to do with those next 4 weeks? Maybe you want to learn to play the guitar. I heard somebody thinking about doing it. Maybe you'd like to learn a language. Maybe you'd like to complete a task that's been on your to-do list for months, maybe even years. Maybe you'd like to tidy up that room that's required tidying up. Maybe you'd like to get up in your loft and sort some stuff out there. But the point I'm making is not so much what you should be doing, but making a choice to reframe it. So rather than lockdown, think about the power of possibility of what you can now do. Gordon bought a book for Alice, which he recommended to me. I've got it here because I'm reading it at the moment. It's a book called Vanya, and it's a true story about a Christian in Russia. And it was about a Christian soldier, and Ivanya, who joined the army, but he would not keep quiet about his faith. It wasn't a good thing in the Russian army. So consequently, every time he talked about his faith, he got punished. And you might think that's dreadful. Here's the thing, he reframed his thinking each time. So one of the first things that happened to him was he was put in a cell. He was locked in a cell for 5 days. Now, one of the things, he had a very busy lifestyle as a soldier, out running, out exercising, doing drills, getting trained, and he found it very difficult in the barracks to find space to pray and to be quiet. And so instead of thinking, oh, woe is me, I'm now in prison for 5 days, he thought, this is fantastic, I now have 5 days to pray to God. And he turned it from a negative into a positive. He reframed his thinking. And that was just such a moving thing to think about. He went on declaring his faith, and then he was encouraged. He was denied food for 5 days. He wasn't fed for 5 days. Now, he had learned the discipline of fasting. His body had already got used to times of fasting and times of feasting. But here's the thing, he couldn't fast when he was out in the barracks doing the jobs that he should be doing. Now he was locked in a cell and not getting fed. Instead of him thinking about, I'm not getting fed, he said, Lord, I'm going to give these days to you as my fast. He reframed the picture. And instead of thinking about what he's not getting, he reframed to think about what God could do in that time. And he had a fantastic time in his cell, not getting fed. And in fact, he came out looking healthier and better. The soldiers couldn't work it out. And we'll come to a story in the Bible that's very similar to that today. But then the third punishment was actually required to stand outside in the freezing cold of Siberia. Most people would have a coat on, and he was required to wear only his summer uniform and stand outside. And here's the thing, he suddenly had time with God. In the middle of the night, no one else around, and as he opened his mind to listening to God, angels came and joined with him, and suddenly he felt the warmth of God's presence. And that warmth warmed him right through. He did not feel the cold at all. And even the captain who came to see him in the middle of the night was so surprised at how well he was doing, and he was so concerned that he might die from the cold outside, that he released him from his punishment and sent him back to his barracks. What I'm talking about here is not about punishment. I'm not talking about it. What I'm talking about is reframing the time that we're in to think about what God might want to do in us and through us. We might be able to do some good and amazing and incredible things. So your kingdom come. God's principles come here on earth. God's principles come here and now as we step into the opportunities that are coming our way, as we step into that time. So, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Let's turn initially to Chronicles chapter 23, beginning at verse 3. Then all the assembly, actually I will read this on screen, and I will look at the screen as well, because that way I can keep the words in sync with what I'm saying. Then all the assembly made a covenant with the king in the house of God. And he said to them, Behold, the king's son shall reign, as the Lord has said, of the sons of David. This is what you shall do. 1/3 of you entering on the Sabbath, and the priests and the Levites shall be keeping watch over the doors. 1/3 shall be at the king's house, and 1/3 at the gate of the foundation. All the people shall be in the courts of the house of the Lord. But let no one come into the house of the Lord except the priests and those of the Levites who serve. They may go in, for they are holy. But all the people shall keep watch of the Lord. And the Levites shall surround the king on all sides, every man with his weapons in his hand. And whoever comes into the house, let him be put to death. You are to be with the king when he comes in and when he goes out. This is a challenging story. And so the Levites and all Judah did according to all that Jehoiada the priest commanded. And each man took his men who were to be on duty on the Sabbath, with those who were going off duty on the Sabbath, which Jehoiada the priest had not dismissed Jehoiada the priest gave to the captains the hundreds, the spears, and the large and the small shields, which had belonged to King David, that were in the temple of God. Then he set all the people, every man with his weapon in his hand, from the right side of the temple to the left side of the temple, all along the altar by the temple, all around the king. And they brought out the king's son, put the crown on him, gave him the testimony, and made him king. Then Jehoiada and his sons anointed him and said, "Long live the king." Okay, what I am sharing with you is a story in the Old Testament that talks about enthroning the king's son, putting the king into place. And then it was a moment of celebration, but it was a moment of honouring the king and bringing the king before God. I am so grateful that we have a queen in our country who leads our nation, who is a Christian, and who quite clearly talks about her times of prayer, who's quite clearly moved by the needs of the people in the nation. Now, I don't know whether you're a royalist or not, but what I'm making is it's so good to know there's someone who heads our nation who has God in mind. And having God in mind, being led by godly people, is such a privilege in today's carnal generation. Think about other nations around the world. Think about the changes that are going on in nations around the world as elections are still being counted and those counts are coming to a close. The world is changing. And it's great right now to get our heads, instead of thinking about, actually let me pause for a moment. I've heard two types of people talking about things in this current season, especially as we head into the second lockdown here in the UK. And the first people are saying, well, when we get back to normal, when we get back to the way it used to be, they're looking backwards. They're looking backwards and trying to remember how it used to be. Do you know what? I think our world has changed. I've heard statistics that say that 10 years of innovation has happened in 6 months. Think about some of the things that we are now experiencing. Homeschooling. There are many children who are now homeschooled when they're sick because they need to stay at home for a safety point of view, safe health point of view. But they're able to do it. They're able to still take part in education. They don't miss out. Think about working from home. Many people who were probably told by your boss, no, you can't work from home, it's not possible. And now, a few months later, working from home is the norm. Cash, what's happened to cash? If you go into any shop now, most signs will say, please, credit cards or debit cards will be taken anywhere, but there'll only be one till that will take cash. And that's all about trying to keep us safe and healthy. But here's the thing. People are now using plastic even more. Cash is disappearing. We will become probably a cashless society in the days ahead. I don't know whether you think that's good or bad, but the point I'm making is change is happening. The change is happening, and so that's when a lot of people are looking back and saying, when we get back to normal. Do you know what? I'm pretty sure we're not going to go back to the way we used to be, including church. Think about this. Yes, we were streaming as a church, running because we was streaming as a church on the phone. We've upped our game. We've upped it again and again every week to try and do things better. We're still not getting it right, and I apologise for that, but we're working hard at trying to do that. We would never have done that if it hadn't been for lockdown. We now have the ability we have more midweek meetings than we've ever had. Now we're gathering in different times on a Tuesday, on a Wednesday, on a Thursday, Friday and Saturday. Different meetings, different people, different faces. If you are feeling isolated or thinking about lockdown, then please let me encourage you to plug into any one of those groups. If you don't want to put your face on camera, no problem. Just have the camera off, but you can still dial in and listen and see other people. So that's one group of people. They're looking back, saying, when we get back to normal. There's another group who are looking forward and saying, once it all settles down. So they're saying, okay, at some point we've got all this noise going on in our world, and once it settles down, then we'll be able to work out what we're going to do. Here's the challenge that I have with both of those two things. The one looking back and the one looking forward is this. It puts the world on hold. It puts you and I on hold. We say, okay, I'm not going to do anything unless I know what I should be doing. And I think one of the biggest challenges right now is the world needs needs leadership. The church needs leadership. Our nations need leadership. Not to just look at what the numbers are. And I shared this a bit last week when I said that I was looking at statistics, and the statistics would take me up and down depending on how I felt. I'm now looking much longer ahead, thinking, okay, what will 2021 look like? What can I invest now to make 2021 the place that I want it to be and the destination that I want it to be? So instead of relying on other people, I'm relying on the plans that God gives me. And so the kingdom will have his principles. The kingdom will have his guidelines. So let's look at a different story now, the story of Daniel. We know the story of Daniel well, and we can look at that. Daniel was required to drink various things, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. He didn't want to drink or eat Now God had brought Daniel into the favour and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your food and drink, for why should he see your faces looking worse than the young men who are your age? Then you would endanger my head before the king. So that actually Daniel was going to look sick because he wasn't eating. So Daniel said to the steward, who was chief of the eunuchs, and said over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days, and let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be examined before you, and the appearance of the young men who eat the portion of the king's delicacies. And as you see fit, so deal with your servants. So he consented with them in this matter and tested them after 10 days. And at the end of the 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate of the portion of the king's delicacies. When we feed at the king's table, when we feel it, then we are healthy and wholesome. Thus the steward took away their portion of delicacies and the wine that they were to drink, and gave them vegetables. Daniel chose whom he would serve. He said, I want to give glory to my God, who is like him. And I don't want to bow down to any other. And so I would say to you today, choose whom you will serve. Choose whom you will serve. And we read a similar phrase in Joshua chapter 24. Beginning at verse 14. Now therefore, fear the Lord, serve him in sincerity and truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the river and in Egypt. Serve the Lord. And if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Yes, we can serve the God of money. Actually, for some people who are, maybe people are concerned about their jobs right now. Some people have been laid off. But you know, I want to encourage people, put your trust in God. We've had a number of people, I can go back and think of Letty's testimony for herself, for Danny and for Alex. I can think of Norman testifying for himself. A number of other people testified that jobs have been provided. And even though some of those people will be furloughed now, they will be furloughed out of a job rather than nothing at all. So God opens doors of opportunity. Choose whom this day you will serve. Some people will be concerned about health and safety, and I would encourage you to be as healthy and as wise as you possibly can. But also get outside and see people. Get on the phone and ring people. Connect to people, because God is a good God. And he wants us to be his communities here on earth. What is the church for? The church is there to be God's witness, to be his hands and his feet, to be ministering angels sometimes. My final scripture this morning, as in all age service, is from Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 to 13. Sir, finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armour of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. Put on the armour of God. Why do we need to put that armour on? For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the principalities and against the powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against the spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armour of God, that you may be able to stand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. There is something about taking a stand. We choose to take a stand on certain things. We choose to take a stand and say no. Daniel chose to tell it, I'm not going to eat the food that's been offered to other idols. I want to eat something else. He chose to make a stand. And actually he was better off. And not only was he better off and healthy, but that was also a witness to the people around him. If we choose to take a stand in our day, then people will look at us and wonder. People will wonder, what is this God whom we serve? Will we take a stand on the kingdom? It's no better place to be. We don't need to stand for the kingdom. The kingdom will stand for itself. What we do need to take a stand on the kingdom, in the kingdom, and live by those principles and declare those things. So what am I talking about today? Well, I want to encourage you. My final 3 points are this. They're up on the screen in front of you. Take a stand. Firstly, do take a stand. Don't be buffeted around by the waves and by the storms and by other people's opinions. Choose this day whom you will serve. So firstly, listen to God. Read his word. See what his word says. Pray. If there are challenging situations where decisions need to be made. But please do ask God. Prayer is a two-way thing. It's a two-way conversation. We talk, but we also listen. If there are times of silence in your prayer time, great. I'd encourage you to journal, to write things down. If you sense God is saying something, even if you're not sure what to do with it, write it down in your diary, write it down in a journal, and see how God continually encourages you and me to keep on track with him. Secondly, make a choice. Don't say, I'll wait till later, or let somebody else make the choice for you. In my opinion, when we default to allowing the community around us, or the group of people that we're hanging out with, to make the decision for us, then it drops down to the lowest common denominator, and the lowest common denominator is often not the best. It's the worst, because it's the lowest thing that people will agree to. So, secondly, make a choice. And then thirdly, make your stand. Now, what's the difference between take a stand and make a stand? Well, take a stand is firstly, we need to make a decision. We need to take that choice in our own hearts and minds. But then as we've done that, we then need to make a stand on that choice that we have made. So these are the important things for us to think about today. Let's stand on the kingdom. We know the Sunday school song talks about the foolish man built his house upon the sand. The wise man built his house upon the rock. The rock didn't mind whether a house was built on it or not. But here's the thing, with good foundations done, the house on the rock stood strong. If we stand strong in God with the principles of God's kingdom, we will know his hand at work in our lives. We will know his principles at working in us and through us. And we will see God glorified.